The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Coming up on today's verdict, ownership rights and what you should know before purchasing a co-op or condo. So get your pen and legal pad ready because today's verdict starts right now. Welcome to today's verdict, the show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney for the next 30 minutes, David Lesch. A person can own a home in several different ways, individually, with someone else, or by owning shares in a property. When you purchase a cooperative or a condominium unit, you now own shares in a bigger corporation. On today's show, we will focus in on two types of properties, cooperatives and condominiums, and give you some legal tips you should consider before sitting down at your real estate closing. Let's take a quick look at the difference between a co-op and a condo.
There are distinct differences between condos and co-ops. The biggest difference is buying a condo, you're buying real property. When you buy a co-op, you're buying shares in a corporation, and then the shares give you the rights to use a particular apartment. Co-ops are known for having stricter rules, and of course, you must apply to a co-op board and get approved in order to move in. Now, condos also have board packages that have to be filled out for the condominium board, but not as strict as co-ops, and you don't often see someone getting turned down by a condo. The only way you typically cannot get through a condo board is if a condominium exercises what's known as its right of first refusal, and the condo board gets together and buys the apartment instead of allowing the prospective purchaser to buy it. This is not something that has happened often, but when it does happen, it's big news.
Joining us today is Stephen Slakis, a partner at the law firm Wolf, Heldenstein, Adler, Freeman, and Hers, located here in New York. Stephen is known for his extensive experience representing clients in real estate-related litigation and has a concentration in cooperatives and condominiums. He is most noted for working in the media circuit as a legal real estate expert, having been quoted in several publications, including the New York Times. He is here to give us some legal insight into ownership rights, and we are lucky to have him. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, so when people think of co-ops and condominiums, sometimes they think it's the same thing, but they are not the same. What is really the basic difference between a co-op and a condo?
The basic difference, David, is that condominium units are real property. You get a deed for it. It's almost like buying a house. And when you think about a condominium building, what it is really is a bunch of houses just stacked up high, because we're in the city. A co-op, on the other hand, is where a corporation actually owns the building, and when you buy into the building, you're issued shares in the corporation, and you're given what's called a proprietary lease to live in the particular apartment that is assigned to you.
All right, so when you're talking about, let's start with the condo.
Right.
You're not getting the lease, but you're getting a deed. Am I correct?
That's right. It's an ownership interest in real property. Again, just like owning a house in the suburbs.
Okay. Now, when we talk about the co-op and we're talking about the proprietary lease, and you get the lease, you were talking about shares in terms of we're not talking about stock market shares. What are we talking about when we talk about shares?
Well, what we're talking about in shares is it is literally a corporation. Not as big as, say, IBM, but it's a much smaller corporation that owns the entire building. So when you buy into the corporation, at your closing, you literally get a stock certificate with a certain number of shares to show that you now own shares in the corporation.
All right. It seems to me that both, and we were talking about the video we just saw before, the condo and the co-op board, you have differences in terms of how you own your unit, but yet you still seem to have a group of individuals who are running your building. Am I correct? What's the difference between let's say, the board or whoever it is that's managing a condo as opposed to the board that's managing the co-op?
Really, in actuality, they do the same thing. In a condominium, the board is called a board of managers, and that board is typically elected by all the unit owners. And in a co-op, the corporation is run by a board of directors, and they too are elected by the shareholders of the corporation.
Okay, now who decides how long that they can, they're in office for, how long when they have to step down? Is it a lifelong appointment? Who makes these decisions?
Many people would hope it's not a lifetime appointment. In both, condominium bylaws really govern the conduct in a condominium, and in in a co-op, there are also bylaws that deal with procedure of how there are boards elected, et cetera. So co-op bylaws and condominium bylaws both set forth the number of board members, their term, when there should be annual meetings to elect those boards, and the like.
Well, let's talk about whether it's a board of managers or a board of directors. What are these people, what do they do? I mean, obviously they have meetings, but what's discussed? What generally happens, at a board of directors meeting?
Boards, whether it's a co-op or a condominium, are really charged with the operation, upkeep, and maintenance of the building. Those really are the buzz terms that you find in condominium bylaws, but the same really holds true in a co-op. Boards are all volunteers, people who typically live in the building. It's an unpaid position, and they're really in charge of running what is usually a multi-million-dollar asset and make sure it runs properly.
Well, let's talk about a little bit about, what it is, what the type of rights you may have as let's start with a condo owner.
Okay, as a condo owner, you're subject to the bylaws. And the bylaws spell out what people can and can't do. For instance, bylaws in a condo would say you can't create a nuisance. In a condominium, bylaws also say things like you're allowed to alter an apartment, but only with board approval. One interesting thing that was pointed out in the beginning of this episode was that many condominium bylaws also provide a right of first refusal to the board of managers. Condominium boards, unlike co-op boards, have no approval right over who can buy. So if a condominium board doesn't like who's going to buy into the building, the bylaws usually give the power of a board to exercise a right of first refusal if they wish.
I mean, do they have a certain amount of time to refuse, 30 days, 60 days, something else?
Typically, it's a limited amount of days. It depends on the bylaws. But when a package comes in, if a board feels that they don't like who the purchaser is, in a condominium that is, they can exercise the right of first refusal and actually buy or sometimes even lease the apartment on the same terms that the person was going to sell or rent the apartment for.
All right, let's contrast that with a co-op now, a cooperative. You want to sell to a particular buyer, and you like the buyer, and you think the buyer would make a nice neighbor for your neighbors, and you want to leave. The co-op does not like who you have coming in. They do not have a right of first refusal. In other words, you can have the co-op board decide to purchase your apartment if they don't like your prospective buyer. Am I correct?
No, you're not correct. In a co-op,
okay,
there's an approval right by the board. So any prospective purchaser, before a closing is allowed and before a stock certificate and a lease are issued to this new person or people, they have to go for an interview, literally an interview, before the board of directors. The board can deny a purchase application for any reason under the sun except the wrong reason.
Okay, well, we're going to actually get back, because we're going to take a break, but I want to get back into some of those questions that are asked at your board interview and to see whether or not the board of directors is acting in good faith. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will ask, when is it a good time for a home buyer to seek the advice of an attorney? We'll be right back.
weight loss, it's one of the many ways to fight osteoarthritis pain. For more information on managing pain, go to fightarthritispain.org.
Be free. Nice, Dad. Nice, Dad. Nice, Dad.
Charles!
Nice, Dad.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
Welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We want to hear from you, so send us your questions, comments, or show ideas, or check us out on Facebook at www.facebook/today's verdict. We've been discussing home ownership when it comes to co-ops and condos, but before you close on either, there may be a rigorous interview process for your selection. Let's take a look at some tips that may help you ace that interview.
We find to a remarkable degree people are not conversant with their own financial statements. And so the first thing you can do is make sure you actually know the details of your financial statement, because there are likely to be questions about them. They may ask for clarification about income. They may ask for clarification about certain items in your net worth which they feel are not completely explained. Increasingly, we find some boards ask about philanthropy, what charitable organizations you may be engaged with and what your involvement is with them. Some boards care a lot about your being involved in the neighborhood, about knowing people in the neighborhood, about having been involved with organizations in the neighborhood. Some boards are very status conscious, some boards are not at all status conscious. In general, I would say if I had to give one recommendation, showing off is almost always a bad idea. Some boards will take a vote on the candidate immediately after they leave, and you'll hear the next day. Sometimes there's an interview committee, and that committee has to report to the full board, and the full board then has to take a vote. That can take an extra week. Sometimes they're wrestling with whether or not they're going to take you or not. We've actually had situations in which people went 3 weeks after an interview without hearing anything.
Joining us today is real estate-related litigation expert Stephen Slakis, who's been discussing the legal differences between co-ops and condominiums. Once again, Stephen, thanks for being with us.
Thank you again.
Let's get into that room where everyone's discussing whether or not you're a good candidate for the building. What types of questions are going around before they even decide to give you an interview?
Well, the first thing any cooperative board looks at is your financials, which, much to the chagrin of any purchaser of a co-op, has to put together, as we just heard, a package to be reviewed. A co-op board really wants to make sure that you're going to have enough money to pay the monthly maintenance, what it's called, or rent in a co-op. Make sure that you're going to be able to carry any mortgage that you're going to have on the apartment, and to otherwise be able to financially, support yourself in the building.
Now, I've heard the term triple assets. What does that mean when we're talking about cooperatives?
You know what? That's a random rule of thumb. Some buildings use that. And what they look at is if you've got if your assets equal triple of what the monthly maintenance is for 3 years, or you know what? I don't even know what it is, because
why would they do that? And co-op boards are notorious making sure that you have so much extra assets in the bank. For what possible reason are they asking for this type of documentation?
They're asking for this because they don't want people to default, because it takes time and money to go after people who don't pay their maintenance. When you don't pay, the wheels start to slow down spinning, and those are the financial wheels of the building. And if everyone starts to not pay, then you can't pay the doormen, the porters, your real estate taxes, any power bills, etc.
The video we were just looking at before talked about your net worth. They obviously look at liquid assets, money that you have in the bank. But what if the monies that you have, are in trust for you? Maybe you get those monies later. What if they're offshore accounts? What is considered to be assets that are worthy for a board to say, you're okay for us?
I don't mean to sound evasive, but it really depends on the type of building. If you're talking about a Fifth Avenue building and you're buying a $15 million apartment, they may want $30 million in the bank. But if you're buying an apartment for $600,000, clearly the requirements are going to be less.
Okay, now, this is different than a condo, am I correct?
That's correct.
All right, why? Why is it different?
Because, again, there's no approval right in a condominium. So when people buy a condominium unit, they could literally mortgage them to the hilt. And that's unfortunately what we saw during the last recession, when people were going out, buying condominiums, financing, if you could believe it or not, almost 100% of the purchase price. And then when things went south and they couldn't pay their common charges, which are the monthly charges in a condominium, they had nothing to lose, so they just walked away from the asset.
And yet it seems that people still want the condos as opposed to co-ops because you have so much more power in being able to sell it or lease it or move it. Am I correct?
That's exactly right. In my opinion, if you have two identical apartments, one a co-op, one a condominium, I think there's going to be a premium for the condominium for precisely that reason. The freedom to sell and lease it. That really carries a premium with it.
Yeah, but let's be fair though, in terms of co-ops, if things go wrong in your co-op apartment, you generally can get things done within the building to help somebody help you out and to fix something in the apartment. Whereas if it's a condo, you're on your own. It's your unit. You have to fix it. If the pipe breaks, good luck. Am I wrong?
You're partially wrong. Both in a co-op or a condominium unit, you, the shareholder in a co-op or the unit owner in a condominium, are really responsible for everything going on inside your apartment. If there's an issue behind the walls, whether it's a co-op or a condominium, that's really going to be a responsibility of the building to address.
Okay. See, it always comes down, from what I see, from my perspective, is do you want to be able to control your neighbors, or is it more important for you to be able to move your apartment and sell it when you want to? Am I correct? Is that really what it comes down to?
Yes, it really depends what you're interested in doing. If you want to buy an apartment for an investment, a condominium is usually people's choice. If you want to buy an apartment to live in and get the protections of a co-op, which I didn't even get into, there's a landlord-tenant relationship between you and the cooperative. Many people, if they want to live there, they like co-ops.
Okay, let's get the lawyers involved here. All right, you're an attorney. When does a lawyer come into the picture? When you're out looking for an apartment, or some other time?
Lawyers come into the picture really at any time we call or we're called. Really, the lawyer comes in before a contract is signed. Okay, so if someone's interested in an apartment, they call their lawyer and they say, look, how do we do this? And I think it's a necessity to have an attorney involved every step of the way. Before any contract is even signed, the lawyer helps spearhead the due diligence process. Whether it's a co-op or a condominium, the first thing a good lawyer is going to do is review board meeting minutes and really dig in and find out what's been going on in the building. So if your lawyer goes and finds out from board meeting minutes that there's going to be a $5 million assessment to make a huge repair, your lawyer might say to you, you might want to look at another building because you're going to get hit with this if you buy into it.
All right, now, let's say you're at the point where you know this is the apartment you want, your attorney has looked at the minutes, you've read the minutes, it seems to be okay. The building is financially sound, there seems to be a reserve fund, there's more money, there's not an assessment going on. Who prepares the contracts?
Well, usually what happens is the seller prepares the contract and it gets sent out. The purchaser then has their attorney look at it, review, mark it up, and then when that's all agreed upon, the purchaser then sends a signed copy of the contract back to the seller's attorney with a contract deposit, which is typically 10%, and then the seller countersigns the contract, deposits the contract deposit. Okay, Sorry if that sounded wrong.
That's okay, because we're going to get to the part where we're going to talk about the board package and what's being reviewed, but right now we have to take a quick break. Coming up, taking your co-op board to court. When is it legal to do so and why? We'll be right back.
This is so cool, Dad. Awesome. This is so cool, Dad.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
How are you? Hey, Mom.
You know, girls, I used to cheer back in my day. Ready? Okay! Go team!
That was amazing. Mom, that was amazing.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
Welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. Stay up to date with us on Facebook at www.facebook/today'sverdict. On today's show, we've been discussing home ownership, specifically the purchasing of a co-op or condominium. And joining us is real estate attorney Stephen Slackus, who is no rookie to the legal ins and outs of home ownership here in New York. Stephen, thanks again for being with us. Listen, before we went to break, you were briefly talking about the relationship between a landlord and tenant and how that correlates to some of the things we're discussing today.
Right.
Let's
David,
talk about it.
Sure. One thing we were talking about before were that there are more protections for people who live in a co-op as opposed to a condominium. And why are there more protections? Because when a proprietary lease is issued to a shareholder in a co-op, that creates a landlord-tenant relationship between the person in the apartment and the co-op corporation, the landlord. So if there's a problem, if there's a breach of the warranty of habitability, those are buzzwords that you always hear in the landlord-tenant arena, or breach of quiet enjoyment. Really, any shareholder resident can complain to the landlord to have him do something about it. In a condominium, you don't have a warranty of habitability. You don't have a right to quiet enjoyment. Although you do have the right to seek redress from the board if someone is bothering you, it's still a much better protection to have a lease and a landlord to go to if there's a problem.
And I guess that's one of the trade-offs that you give up, having the right to have a deed in terms of your condo and having more control over your property and selling it and leasing it. With a co-op, you don't have those rights, but at the same time, you have the lease, which gives you so many more protections.
Exactly.
All right, now let's get back into the closing forum. And at some point, we're going to have to get a board package over to the board of directors or managers to review.
Right.
Tell the viewers what a board package is. Really.
Well, a board package is usually a couple-page questionnaire that asks who's going to be living in the apartment, are there any children, what their ages are, do you have pets, etc. Sometimes it even asks where did you go to high school, college, law school, any other graduate degrees. And it really just it gets a bunch of information so the board can sort of get to know who you are. But along with that, co-op boards also ask for a net worth statement, which is an asset liability statement, so they can see how much money you have.
Right.
That's just one way of doing it. And then they usually ask for a couple years of tax returns.
All right, now the board of directors has reviewed the package, how many the board of directors there may be, and they review it, and they decide to schedule what's called an interview. Am I correct?
That's right.
All right, how does the interview process work?
Well, usually an interview process is scheduled through your broker. You'll be contacted, and you try to arrange a time to meet. Of course, when my wife and I bought our last co-op, we showed up at the board meeting, and they forgot to tell us that they moved it to a different day. But you show up at presumably the agreed upon day, and you sit down, and many co-op boards try to make it a very relaxing environment, really just get to know you. As a real estate attorney, I always advise my co-op boards, don't ever call anyone in for an interview if you're still got a big question about their financials.
Because it almost taints the entire process. I mean, if you're not really sure about financially whether it's worthwhile, why are you even trying to see what type of character they are?
That's true, and I hate to say it, but the board could also be exposing itself to potential liability, because if they're question mark on the financials and they bring someone in and then deny them, that purchaser might say, you discriminated against me or did something
All right, so let's
bad.
talk about the liability now.
Yeah.
You're unhappy, you've been denied access to the building, you love the building, you couldn't wait to get in there, and the board told you, wait, I'm sorry, you're not good enough for us. What is your recourse, if you have one?
Well, you do have recourse. It's very difficult. Again, boards can deny anyone for any reason except the wrong reason. The problem is actually finding out or digging to figure out what that wrong reason is. Clearly, if you or I applied to a building, a co-op, and got rejected, and we found out that discrimination was involved, that would be actionable. And typically, boards do not have to disclose what their reasons for denying an applicant are, but if you sue them, then they have to disclose it.
And I always hear the term bad faith when it comes to boards. What are we talking about?
Well, bad faith or self-dealing is something, those are buzzwords that also enable you to sue a board. Boards, whether it's a co-op or condominium, are protected by what's called the business judgment rule. And the business judgment rule essentially says that courts will not second-guess the decisions made by a board of a co-op or a condominium, except if there's discrimination, self-dealing, or bad faith. Now, for a purchaser, really the biggest claim would be discrimination or some violation of law. But to sue for self-dealing or bad faith, that's really a claim that the person who's trying to sell the apartment would be making.
Okay, before we go, because we don't
Yes,
have much time,
sorry.
Just one last piece of advice to somebody who's going out into the real estate market today. Co-op, condo, what do you do?
You know, I go, both ways on this. This week, I'm in favor of co-ops. I think if you've got a family and you're living in New York City, you want very good protections, having the landlord-tenant relationship. I would stick with a co-op.
Are there other websites to look at to maybe help you, determine where it is?
There are several websites, cnyc.com, which is the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums. There's Habitat Mag for Habitat Magazine. There's cooperator.com. And there's also a good one, Brick Underground.
So there are resources for people if you really want to do the research to find out.
Absolutely.
Well, Stephen, I want to thank you very much for being here. I think the viewers really appreciate it. I certainly appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
And hopefully the next time you're going to come back and give us even more information on the present state of co-op and condo law.
It would be a pleasure.
Well, that's all for tonight. It's now time to deliberate. I'd like to thank our attorney, Stephen Slackis, for joining us, and of course you for watching. Remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you would like to see on the show, email me at davidlesch@BronxNet.org. And until we see you again, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you next time.